Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Startup Week. It's day 4. How are we feeling? Great. Okay, try that again. How are we feeling? There's more coffee over there for anyone who wants it. I'm Kate Barton. I am the Chief of External Affairs of the Downtown Denver Partnership, and I lead the team that puts together Denver Startup Week, so really grateful for all of you for being here. A big thank you to our sponsor, Amazon, for putting together HQ, and to our partners at Matter, who will be leading this conversation this morning. We have a great one. We are talking about the future of clean technology and hearing from the entrepreneurs that are leading it. I'll leave you with that bit and turn it over to Charles, who's going to lead the conversation from Matter. You have some great experts here to share some information, so enjoy.
Great, thank you. My name's Charles Trowbridge. I'm with Matter Communications. Just a little quick background. We are a full-service brand elevation agency. We are super excited to be able to be on the stage with this group of folks right here. A lot of brain power, a lot of really interesting and diverse backgrounds in the clean tech space. And so we're really looking forward to facilitating this conversation and kind of opening up the floor at the end. So we're joined today by Mike Freeman, the CEO of Innosphere Ventures, Rachel Shane, she's the CMO at Project Canary, Garrett Peterson, he's the Senior Vice President of Project Development at Pivot Energy, and Rob Ritz, Director of Partnership at AMP Robotics. I'd like to just give them a quick second to introduce themselves and their companies briefly before we jump in.
Hi, thanks for having us. Yeah, my name is Rob Ritz, and I work at AMP Robotics. I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about the company and the technology here, but AMP Robotics is a Colorado company, started in 2014. It's headquartered in Louisville, Colorado, and we develop automation technologies for recycling. So what goes into your recycling bin, our technologies identify those, separate those into the commodity streams for the downstream markets that take those and turn it into new products.
Good morning, everybody. Mike Freeman. I'm with an organization called Innosphere Ventures. We work with science and technology-focused startup companies kind of across Colorado and surrounding states. Kind of 3 legs to the organization. A technology incubator, so that's a pretty intensive, generally about a year-long program working with founders. We've done some specialized real estate, just opened some new labs for biotech companies, and then we're also in VC, have done 3 funds, so kind of mix all that together under this Innosphere Ventures umbrella.
Hi friends, my name is Rachel Shane. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Project Canary. We are climate technology to help reveal emissions that you can't see that are doing quite a bit of harm up there, and our goal is to keep them in the pipes and measure it and bring actual measurement and digitization to decarbonization. I won't go down that whole rabbit hole, but really happy to be with these guys and be back in person with everyone. Thank you guys for being here.
Morning, everyone. My name's Garrett Peterson, SVP of Project Development for Pivot Energy. Pivot Energy is a national renewable energy developer and owner-operator. We're headquartered in Denver, have about a 150-person team, half here in the Denver Boulder and then half remote. We focus primarily on community solar development, small utility, and also battery storage technology.
Great. So I'd like to, before we really get in depth, kind of do a little bit of scene setting and talk about what the state of the sustainability industry looks like. And I was hoping, Mike, maybe you kind of being on the front lines of the startup and the funding world, you could give a little bit of insight into what you're seeing.
Yeah, I'll try to do that for sure. And I brought some cards only because I'm going to hit you with some data, and I am in my mid-50s. I can't remember all this stuff anymore, so that's kidding. So I think generally everybody has a pretty good handle on what's going on around the climate challenge, but just let me hit you with some numbers you might not kind of deal with in your day-to-day world. We need to eliminate 59 gigatons of carbon from the planet by 2050. And that's a number I can't even get my head wrapped around. And how that breaks down is energy is about half of that, industrial applications about 12 gigatons, ag about 9, so on and so forth. These are huge numbers. And when you start drilling into how does technology, particularly engineering and science-related technology, sort of work from the perspective of tackling this big problem, you get into some areas that are pretty obvious around electrification of transportation, grid decarbonization, ag applications and fertilizer, soil carbon capture, on and on and on. So the interesting thing, just for our organization, is we're working with scientists, engineers, predominantly, kind of across the technology arenas, is there's a lot of opportunity for entrepreneurship coming at us that I think we don't really fully understand or appreciate at all quite yet. But that's the exciting part. The tough part is it's also going to disrupt a lot of traditional industries. If you think about the U.S. auto industry, the U.S. steel industry, go down that list. How do utilities generate cleaner power and distribute it on the grid? These are very, very complex questions, really, when you get down to it. Rob's World of Recycling is a whole waste component. So, just got a high level, I just wanted to kind of set the stage for what are we talking about. And then you look at Colorado and say, well, how are we doing in climate? I think it's a mixed bag, and I know a lot of people don't like that message. And we're in economic development, that's what we do, and I'm pretty regularly, be provocative around this. I could go way more provocative, but we're not doing great. Where we're doing well is we built foundational assets, 3 major universities, we have 30 federal labs. We're pulling in a lot of federal funding, National Science Foundation and DOE in particular. That's all good. But guess what? Last year, 14 companies in Colorado were backed by VC. 14 companies only. And so that's a bit of a challenge. We have the potential to really accelerate climate technology startups. We're not quite there yet. I think that's the good news is, hey, we can excel. So if you are an entrepreneur, maybe anybody working on a company in climate? Hopefully a few people. Okay, great. A couple of things, resources maybe that you're aware of, just make sure. There's a variety of resources, but the main ones I'd say if you're in climate are the TechStars program with Nature Conservancy, Third Derivative, and Innosphere. There's certainly other programs, and I don't mean to exclude anyone, but if you're looking for more intensive support as a founder, that's probably where you're going to go. On the fundraising venture side, not so great, guys. You may not know that about 96, 97% of all VC capital deployed in Colorado, all industries, is headquartered somewhere else. There's a handful of seed stage funders in climate, like Techstars, Altera, Rocky Venture Club, Blackhorn, Innosphere Fund. There's a handful. Where we have a lot of trouble, maybe Rob will cover this, is later stage. You're going to be out of state immediately in later stage investment, and so you have to be kind of aware of that. And then just kind of wrap up on sort of how is Colorado doing. If you look at some of the major reporting indexes on kind of clean tech or climate tech, whichever term you want to use, kind of face value, Colorado looks great. Hey, we're 4th in job concentration. Okay, fantastic. 8th in VC investment. I don't know how that one I'm still trying to grapple with. But these are legitimate reports. And not surprisingly, 1st in R&D per capita, led by the federal labs. Okay, great. But guess what? Job creation going down. R&D per capita at the university level going down. Startup growth going down. And so these are the challenges I want to throw out. On the one hand, get people aware of these things, but also, guess what? We can win in Colorado in not only climate tech, but other R&D intensive industries. And that's really what gets us very motivated working with all our partners is thinking, if you pulled a map out and said, who's going to win non-coastal? Is it going to be St. Louis, Kansas City, Dallas, Denver, Salt Lake? Who's it going to be? I think it's going to be Denver, Colorado. Broader Colorado. And so I think that's the big challenge to throw out today. We need to be thinking along those lines. Unfortunately, not everyone's quite there yet. So.
Yeah, and I think, looking ahead a little bit too, one of the things that I'd be interested to hear, and Rachel, you had mentioned this is something that you felt strongly about, was that regardless of sort of where the numbers might be right now, as we look ahead, the leadership structure that Colorado has maybe is an opportunity to really sort of look forward and have a good foundation for growth.
Yep, thank you for that. I believe that the leaders here, and by virtue of being next to these amazing leaders, we help grow more climate tech leaders. You see companies we've raised, we're at Series B company at 121. I think making sure, doing fact check, 121. Yes, we raised a lot out, but Series A, we raised as much here as we could. And every time that success happens, we feed this ecosystem and we help each other because Colorado, I believe, is different because of the universities, because of the Give First, open door policies. The leadership teams here are different and more welcoming, and I believe can be more inclusive and more interesting, which is everything you need to be innovative, right? Innovation is not simple. It requires very messy collaboration. And I think Coloradans are primed for that. We're great leaders in that space.
And a very good disruptive attitude as well. It seems like there's a lot of people and companies really trying to solve problems, kind of starting at the foundation, building upward. And Garrett, I know what some of the things that Pivot work on in terms of getting more access to solar and growing some of those communities. Maybe that's something you could kind of talk about with the group here.
Yeah. When you talk about disruptors in the energy space, I think we need to consider that that's not just renewable energy. We're not talking about that. There's so much of a larger market that needs to be disrupted. We have different energy structures across the U.S. Colorado, it is regulated on both the retail and the wholesale side. So raise your hand if you are an Xcel Energy subscriber customer. You don't have a choice where your energy is coming from. It's Xcel. You go to a different market where it's a deregulated retail market, you may be able to say, well, I want to install a smart thermostat in my home that is actually going to interact with other smart thermostats, relay utility data, create a more efficient grid by saying, here's the average of this home temperature and when we use energy, when we draw with like a dishwasher or something like that. And that technology can be scaled across the industrial platforms. And that is where we need to be innovative and push that change, because some of the energy policy in the US is 100 years old. And some of the utilities are 100 plus years old. And it's going to take really technology breaking into that and providing consumer choice, providing data, and providing different options as a way for people to access all types of energy and create something that's more efficient. So we are primarily focused on community solar. That is one avenue in a regulated energy market in which somebody in Xcel could subscribe to a community solar garden owned by Pivot or any other company. Your credits get allocated to your energy bill from a centrally located solar array. It doesn't have to be on your house. It's a very low bar to entry, no investment on your side. You can cancel. It's almost like a cell phone contract. That is only available in about 15 states. And so don't forget, when you're looking at technology, there's a lot involved in that. There's also a lot of policy that enables technology. And so working as a collective group to push forward just the ability for different states, different energy sources to utilize technology is incredibly important to really start to bridge the gap between fossil fuel generation and renewable energy generation.
I just want to add one thing about Xcel Energy. They're actually a customer of ours. It's hard to explain, not a paying customer, but they have let this little climate tech startup help them to say it's quite complicated. I come from tech space. Energy is new and learning. When you look at those pipeline maps across the U.S., it's insane. Xcel was the first utility in the United States to say, I'd like to try to track where these molecules are coming from so that we can do a pilot program to say we are actually delivering lower emissions natural gas to our homes. It's a big deal in a regulated state, and they are taking a big swing, and it's a big risk for them to work with this little scaling company to help figure this out. This stuff is hard, and the playbook isn't written.
Don't let me come off as disparaging of Xcel Energy. They have set one of the most aggressive clean carbon, completely carbon-free by 2050, I think 80% by 2040.
Yep.
So don't let me, it's more just the structure in which we have to work around to provide access to different forms of energy.
I'd love to know too, Rob, with AMP Robotics kind of working on the solid waste side of things, the recycling, the waste management, what is AMP seeing in Colorado specifically as some of the biggest challenges that we need to really address and run with?
Everyone's got garbage, right? Everyone in this room, every business, everybody produces some form of solid waste. So in some ways, it's a really good business to be in because it never ends. It's like a river or an ocean. It just keeps going. But Colorado has some pretty distinct challenges. Particularly if you want to grow in the kind of composting or the recycling side of solid waste, where you want to recover some type of material or commodity out of that waste stream. And Colorado's primary challenge is that it's twofold. One, it's isolated. It's fairly isolated geographically in this country. And the second is that it doesn't have a large manufacturing base upon which to buy commodities that you could produce. So if we look at the first one, which is geographic, there's these large things to the west called the Rocky Mountains, which tend to increase transportation costs. But in this business, we're not shipping diamonds and gold. We're shipping waste plastic, we're shipping glass, or we're shipping organic material or metals. And the heavier an object or objects get in that mixture, the shorter your shipping distance is to make it economical. So for example, if you're recycling glass, you probably need a buyer of your glass product to be within 75 miles. And it's probably very similar for composting as well. It's very heavy, right? You have food waste or green waste in there, and you can't ship that very far. And this becomes quite compounded in today's transportation cost regime with the cost of diesel and even the cost of moving on train is becoming expensive. So you need to try to find a local markets for that. But each one of these is different. I mean, composting, the output of composting generally is a soil amendment, right? But an output of plastic could be another plastic, it could be a fuel, or it could be some step into a chemical refining process. So each one has some unique aspects as to where that goes. So the geography is one thing. Who buys it regionally is the other challenge that I mentioned. And Colorado doesn't have as large a manufacturing base as you would find in other parts of the country, like the Southeast or the Midwest, which is where a lot of the buyers of many of these materials are, particularly for what's coming out of your recycling bin. So Colorado's manufacturing base needs to grow in order to help those recyclers. And there's a lot of folks who are working on that. The state has done quite a bit of studies and has launched several initiatives for that. We do have some plastic reclaimers that are developing here. And certainly there is a high demand here now for glass and aluminum because we like to make a lot of beer in this state, right? So that's manufacturing base for that. So the two that get really challenging there are plastics and then composting and the movement of organics. And organics will be inherently local. You just can't move it far, like I said, and you need buyers here, not only for the processing of that, but for the final consumption, whether it's your garden or the zoo or some industrial adopter of that. Plastics, you can ship them quite a bit of ways. However, it is a commodity business, and commodity prices go up and commodity prices go down. We're currently in a down phase, right, for plastic in particular, which were actually lower than the historical averages for scrap commodities. So that's a challenging business to be in if you are trying to take these materials and move them. But I'll talk later a bit about some of the demands there outside of Colorado and why those prices may go up and why it's over a long term a supply constrained environment in plastics.
So I'd also love to know, Rob, following up, because you're talking about tackling a global challenge, right? I mean, we've talked about energy, we've talked about solving some of these other problems, but trash here. I mean, thinking about maybe the waste that potentially is generated from something like Startup Week. And I know everyone's doing a great job with this, but I just, as an example, things kind of happening in a nutshell. As AMP started to grow and develop, what was that process look like going from a startup now as a later stage startup through the growing, the scaling, the funding? What can you tell some of the entrepreneurs in the audience here about that process?
Sure. Well, the first thing I'll do is recommend that afterwards you talk with some of my fine colleagues who are here, who sat in rooms when there was 4 or 5 of us at the time. The company now has about 300 employees, and we've gone through several stages of venture capital growth. We would be considered kind of your classic tech startup growth, where we have a novel technology at the time, so a differentiated technology itself. And that technology is a machine learning-based algorithms that, through a camera, look down onto a conveyor belt of passing recycling material, and then in real time infer what those commodity types are, and then help inform how to sort those. That goes further in terms of kind of similar to tracking molecules, is that we're actually digitizing this waste stream. So then we have a whole data value proposition for both our customers, who are companies like Waste Management, like GFL, these large waste operators, to understand what the material flow is through their facilities, out of their facilities, and aggregate across all of those. We have also now taken a step back and said, well, one of our goals is to reduce the cost of sorting and recycling. So recycling can be competitive with landfills on a cost per ton basis. And we love our customers, and they do a great job, and we want them to keep buying lots of robots, because we integrate all this tech into robots, and they go into their facilities and act like people did. However, the recycling infrastructure tends to be about 20 to 30 years old in this country. It's lacked investment for quite some time and innovation. So to really go after those costs, we took a step back and said, can we apply our technology into our own facility design, which includes not just that AI, that differentiated artificial intelligence that operates at a lower cost, but can we also distribute materials so we can digitize all the material, move it fast, and produce really new and interesting kind of plastic mixes for emerging markets. And so we've done that, and we actually also own and operate our own sorting facilities around the United States as well. So that's where we are at now. But that journey in between, right, so what is that like, is a bit of that, in some ways, that classic tech investment story. We have a brilliant founder, Dr. Matanya Horowitz, who's from CU, from Louisville, Colorado, came back to Colorado to found the company after doing work for his doctorate. And he saw recycling as a really interesting place to enter with these types of machine learning technologies that are common in applications like autonomous vehicles and in agriculture, and looking at imagery and interpreting decisions from that. And so he started with a distinct value proposition, which was that these recycling facilities cannot keep people employed for more than several weeks because they're standing there sorting garbage. And that's a very, very dangerous and difficult thing to do. It's hot, it's freezing, there's hypodermic needles, there's diapers. What else is there? Dead alligators, we've seen those, all kinds of stuff, right, in our Florida customers. Anything known to mankind comes through a recycling facility, and it's a good place for automation. So we grew initially through non-dilutive funding. And I think this is an important note, particularly for software developers and hardware integrators here. In our startup community, I've seen historically software tends to shy away from that non-dilutive funding. Right? You know, I can get some angels, I can get some seed funding and some venture capital, but I'd encourage you to look into these types of programs like what we did with the National Science Foundation. We were doing software development and hardware integration. We weren't doing advanced chemistry or pharmaceutical work because we mapped to a distinct area that the National Science Foundation was pursuing, which was solid waste. So look into those themes. There can be non-dilutive funding in there. And I think we raised over $2 million initially through the National Science Foundation in order to prove the concept and obtain 3 customers in that time before we ever went out and got equity funding through seed rounds. And those 3 customers were very important because we mapped to that value proposition, that challenge of keeping labor in there. And we found a patron called the Carton Council of North America that helped us with that, which sounds like the mafia or something, you know. But they are the carton manufacturers that make your juice boxes and such. And they are continuously working on the journey of recyclability for that packaging type. How can they get communities to accept this? How can they get markets to recycle this? So getting early revenue was very important to us. Getting non-dilutive funding was, because then we entered the proof points we had for venture capital to then move into those kind of seed, Series A, Series B environments where we're then growing on other proof points, which is then just really transitions to how well can you repeat this? How well can you predict this? So I certainly encourage you in those early stages to really think about non-dilutive sources of funding and where you could find that without occupying your cap table.
And just quickly to build on Rob's, I totally agree. Unless you're in academia, a lot of startups don't understand how to secure non-dilutive. Here's a great example of some folks that came out of industry. The core team were all PhD EEs, and they're tackling a very complex problem of large electric vehicle charging. So imagine at the bus depot for K-12, hundreds of buses, and they're all EV. I mean, this is a substation that will be built to fuel those buses. And then you have hundreds of large batteries that need to be charged and discharged. Also, National Science Foundation funded. They built some incredibly innovative algorithms that they built software around. So I just want to say absolutely, and there's other agencies besides NSF, by the way.
Yeah, and I'd love to know too, from an early perspective, Rachel, Project Canary having gone through a Series B, what does that process look like? And how are you working, how's Project Canary working within the traditional energy industry to sort of facilitate and foster this sense of disruption, maintaining environmental standards, and helping that area grow in responsibility as well?
So carefully. So a year and a half ago, we were 20 people. Now we're about 150. Our leadership team is the size of the entire company used to be. All of it is hard. I know you know what I'm talking about. I will say this is the first time I've worked with a CEO who used to be a politician, and I've learned some very interesting things from him. One is he hired an expensive CMO early. I mean, I took equity and dropped the cash, all the things that we all do. Okay, but this is a CEO who said, I get it, we're gonna be selling this new technology that we're still figuring out to people who do not want it, which is the oil and gas industry. We're bringing math to an equation that used to accept estimates, right? We also are not denigrating anybody. It's not an us versus them. We're the ones that want all this energy. I'm just trying to buy these guys some time, like about a decade, to try to decarbonize oil and gas as much as we can while batteries and storage and recycling and everything else comes on. So when you really talk to energy people and you get in deep with this, you really learn that it's not black and white, this is not binary, and it is incredibly hard because there's no playbook. So I'll revert back to, again, Chris Romer, our CEO, who tapped me out of the Blackstone Entrepreneurs Network to start helping consulting, and eventually I was like, oh, sign me up, because this is a big problem, and we can help solve about 25 to 30% of it. So sign me up. Methane, right? Recycling. This is not sexy stuff, but oh my God, is it gonna make a difference? And what we did is run a campaign and run a brand campaign very early on and run a political campaign that said, we're here to help, we're doing math, this is where things are going. We made up a word called responsibly sourced gas, and we released the trademark once the market picked it up, because you're like, great, the more people that talk about this and realize that there is an alternative to a commodity, the better. And so I think part of our secret sauce to get through those series was also when Brookfield opens their door, Insight Partners on Series B, honestly, the brand did its job. It opened the door for us. We created a ton of trust, and I worked super hard. When I say I mean also like my team and my colleagues. There is no real I in this. We pounded the hell out of LinkedIn and built this up way over 12,000 followers and did everything we could to look extremely legitimate and stop talking like a startup to get the big capital. Those are big checks for VCs to write.
So, Garrett, I'd like to know too, kind of building off of this, when we start talking about access to renewable energy, I think solar is something that many people are familiar with, but not necessarily understanding how to tap into it. You mentioned, community solar, developing solar in low-income areas. What are some ways that you're seeing that particular energy, which is industry, which is disruptive in and of itself, being disrupted further by maybe companies like Pivot that are bridging the gap between the energy provision and the accessibility?
So Pivot, about 5 years ago, saw a problem where community solar was really issued through utilities. You signed up as a utility customer, you got a bill credit. And throughout the US, like I said earlier, there's probably 15, 16 community solar markets that are really functioning. We looked at that problem and said, we need some sort of software, some in-house billing tool that interfaces with the utility, that takes all of the subscribers within our community solar gardens and allows us to place bill credits on their utility bill. So we had to build a platform that interfaces with, at this point, probably 25 different utilities. So each one has different standards. You have consumer protection practices, you have data security, things like that. But we use that tool as a way to facilitate what we would call energy equity. One of the challenges with solar is it's traditionally been held to either a very large utility scale that either a utility or like a Facebook and Amazon procures that energy, or you're a homeowner, so you have to own a home first, and then you have to have enough money to buy a solar system to put on your roof. It leaves a very large gap of people who don't own homes, people who can't afford that, people who live in apartments, condos, row homes, you name it. And so what we did was really build out this platform called Sun Central. Case in point, in Colorado, our last RFP with Xcel Energy was 41 megawatts of projects, which is the equivalent to 10,000 homes, all bid into the Xcel RFP to provide energy to low-income customers that cannot access that. And it's over a 50% bill savings to those customers. So if you look at that, that is providing, like I said, energy equality to people who say, I don't own my home, I don't have this, but I need some sort of platform to be able to subscribe to that. We now have over 250 megawatts of projects under Sun Central management. It's a kind of a secondary arm of our business, and we're scaling that software platform to be able to provide different types of services, data reporting, things like that are incredibly important in just understanding how renewable energy interacts with the rest of the grid. So in Colorado, we're really disrupting the market in that manner by not selling to a utility necessarily or a big commercial organization, but 10,000 low-income customers who now see significant energy savings because of that technology.
And that actually brings up a great point, because I wanted to talk a little bit about the Inflation Reduction Act. There was a significant amount of money, I think $300 billion specifically for energy and climate initiatives, and then I think $60 billion for just energy infrastructure specifically. So I'd love to know from Pivot's perspective, especially as a sort of more mature company, further along the line, national, what does this act signify? What kind of things, when you talk about accessibility, will this sort of help facilitate?
So everybody's aware of the IRA or the IRA, whatever you want to call it. I think it provides some incredible tailwinds to the renewable industry, but it also into EV charging, into CO2 emission reduction. And this, to me, signifies an investment in what we'd call distributed energy resources. So rather than a transmission level resource, we're talking something that is locally sited. It could be a carport, it could be on top of a school, but it's providing additional tax incentive for those type of projects. It's also facilitating additional tax incentives, and I want to be clear, it's a tax incentive, not a subsidy. So this is tax money that the federal government would otherwise take in that they are paying back to businesses for investing in renewable energy. And it's pushing renewable energy projects in low to moderate income census tracts, and also energy communities. And an energy community is defined as either where a coal generation of electricity has happened and that has been decommissioned, or in counties where a certain percentage of the population is employed by fossil fuel industry. So one of those energy communities would be Weld County. I think we both do a lot of work in Weld County. And what this act to me is really saying is we need to bridge the gap here between communities that have predominantly been ignored by renewable energy, facilitate workforce investment. It calls for prevailing wage. So basically saying this is an industry that now employs almost 300,000 people, and it is a career path. It's not a, you dabble in it and then you go out. The one other thing that the IRA has done that we're incredibly excited about is it created a standalone tax credit for storage, and storage only. Traditionally, storage had to be paired with solar in order to secure a tax credit. And that is the big tipping point for storage in a lot of markets. In places like New York or California, where you have incredibly peaking energy costs, the market was there already, but now this creates a secondary market. And it creates an opportunity for investment in technology from a standpoint of just battery technology. Mike, you mentioned the algorithms that go into these. So the software that is basically tracking the grid, saying this is when we have to dispatch. It goes from anywhere from like grid resiliency to basically an arbitrage play in the market where you can have a battery and say, wow, power is $1,000 a megawatt. I'm going to dispatch this battery. And then at night, when it's $10 a megawatt, I'm going to recharge it. And so this is going to create a bridge in a lot of different ways to where we can increase the implementation of renewable energy on the grid, stabilize it with our existing nat gas and coal production, and create a more resilient grid that frankly goes towards energy security and also just more job creation for the industry. Yep.
And maybe just one thing to add to that. So imagine you're the Marriott Corporation, you're Baker Hughes, you're Anheuser-Busch. All these same benefits apply to commercial and industrial real estate, which is why partly we invested in a company that does the analytics that can look simultaneously at hundreds of properties anywhere in the U.S. It's only U.S. right now, but this is a real estate investment at the end of the day. And that's the interesting thing about this. If you're in energy, I would say take a cue from this company, Catalyze, here in Colorado. They're energy folks, but they realized if they don't speak the language of real estate, they'll never sell anything. So the number one metric they look for with commercial and industrial owners is called net operating income. If you know real estate at all, NOI, that's the number. So their analytical platform runs hundreds of properties. If you want to do, you can do a single property too, for sure. But for example, the Target stores in Southern California, they ran them all and said, here's 8 that give you a 20% NOI boost or higher. They're like, that's a no-brainer. And guess what? We're going to turn around, we're going to finance those projects. By the way, are you electrifying your fleet? Yes. So we've invested in another company called Microgrid Labs. Getting into storage, you need a battery. Of course you do now with the IRA. So that's how you link all this together. But there's a lot of technology gaps in this, in what I just described, big time. A lot of software issues, connectivity, analytics, and one that's a kind of boring, asset management. So imagine if you're a commercial industrial real estate owner, hundreds of properties, you deploy solar, some flavor of solar battery and EV charging. Guess what? How do you manage all that as a single asset effectively as the owner? It is very, very difficult to do this now. So that's the kind of the gap areas, just to say we're looking for things like that from an investment perspective. But just wanted to say this IRA Act for entrepreneurs is going to be huge because there's going to be an enormous amount of capital flowing into this sector. And you ought to be looking for startup ideas or jumping into companies if you're interested in climate and electrification, then you should be jumping into companies that are doing this kind of work.
Yeah, I would just add it also incentivizes domestic manufacturing and creates larger tax carve-outs for that. The one other aspect of the act is it creates a minimum corporate tax, which now means all corporations have some sort of federal tax burden, meaning they can be investors in a project, in a renewable energy project, and offset that federal tax burden.
And how, Rachel, so I was just wanted to jump in and say, how is Project Canary approaching this with its customers and its industry base?
This is the first company I've been a part of that has a policy team. Half of them are in DC, the other half is here. There's 4, like it's so big. But it's been really interesting to help them translate what all of that means to the marketer, who's like, let me just top line that for you. So if anyone else would like the top line, we have a 12-page summary on our blog if you don't want to read all 500 pages. But I see what it's doing is exactly what Mike said. And I also think for friends that I know in the solar industry, it's stabilizing the inflow of capital so that you guys don't feel like you're just like, oh my God, we got to hang on, and see if the capital keeps coming. So it is really monumental. I feel like it was very poorly branded and named, but it is an incredible piece of legislation. And nothing this powerful has ever moved this fast. It is a wild time to be in climate tech. I mean, it's a gift.
Is that, Mike, just to go back to what you were referring to before, is this sort of maybe an inflection point in terms of the conversations that are happening at the venture capitalist and investor level, looking at now maybe smaller industries, or how is that going to impact those conversations?
I'm not sure I know, honestly, but I'll speculate. But if you look at the amount of capital that is projected by folks like McKinsey, it's like, pretty reputable folks, there's just hundreds of trillions of dollars that need to go into decarbonization across all industries. So I think, in my feeble mind, I kind of look at that number. Okay, how do you break this down? A lot of that's going to be government funding for recycling projects, for example, local dollars. A bunch of it will be corporate. A lot of it will be private equity, and then there'll be some venture. So I try to break that down in my own mind and say, what technology areas likely lend themselves to venture capital, because that's the world I'm in. That's a much smaller subset. So Catalyze, the company I mentioned earlier that does this work with commercial industrial, they're private equity backed, and they've deployed a gigantic amount of money. Now, we happened to invest in the company early when they were a software company, and we thought, hey, this is an analytical piece of software. It'll be very valuable for someone. It turned out to be true, but guess what? When the smarter money came in, we turned this company into a development company. Great. And that's made a huge difference. If that company had been private equity backed first and then came to us, we're like, this is not a fit. So I think you have to understand how to break these things down. So we're more interested in things like microgrid labs, very sophisticated software for managing large electric vehicle charging. That's pretty straightforward. We're seeing a lot of applications in AI. We're seeing some really interesting things, low-cost methane detection live. So that's a real problem right now. If you go out in the field, a lot of times we're just shooting an asset with an IR gun, and they're like, oh, it's not leaking today. Great.
Now.
Right now. Well, no, right, exactly. I'll come back in 6 months. So, we need continuous monitoring, for example. But the edge-based device that does that, there's some technology out there that's not great. So that's just kind of how we're thinking about it. But just to put in perspective, last year there were about 1,400 climate tech VC-funded companies in the U.S. And so this is an area that's attracting capital and is going to be more and more and more. And so again, I encourage you to really think critically and understand where the dollars are going to come from for whatever it is you're trying to do, and follow the right pathway. If it's private equity, great, know the difference. If it's go non-dilutive VC, as AMP did, great, know that. I think a lot of entrepreneurs don't fully appreciate the pathway difference and get trapped into that. We see companies all the time that, like, you should be talking to small private equity, billion-dollar firms and we're a small VC fund. Like, this is not a fit. So anyway, I think that's, just think about where the dollars are likely to flow. I'd really study that. There's some great analytical reports out there. One is I personally like because it's pretty straightforward. McKinsey did a very, very detailed study called Getting to Net Zero. It's pretty intense, like a 100-page report, but you can pick the sectors that you're really interested in and sort of, really go a little bit deeper into those. I'd encourage you to see that. And then, follow the Crunchbase pitch books. They're putting climate reports out constantly. And so a real area we're real interested in right now is monitoring in climate. So if, literally you can't mitigate what you can't measure.
Oh, tears.
And, this is a gigantic problem that's not widely understood outside of our industry, is that soil carbon, for example, how do you measure this? Well, there's no way to do this, actually. People are just making this up right now, which is fine. It's a place to start. But that's a place where I think Colorado can shine. And so we're really doubling down on measurement, monitoring, prediction, mitigation. That's, in that food chain, if you will. That's interesting for us now.
Just to put a little finer point on what Mike said about the VC funding, disclaimer, I'm not in VC. Our company is owned by private equity. And a part of their fund was directed by investors that it had to be ESG investments. I think it's something we have to recognize about the ESG revolution that's happening right now. And the one thing that's to everybody's advantage is that's very broad in the sense of like, what does ESG mean to a VC fund versus a tech entrepreneur, and does it fill that niche? And educating yourselves on really what ESG is, how it's measured, the ins and outs of it is something I think, again, from an outside perspective, that would help VC investment in different technologies.
And what about, Rob, at the state level? So we're talking about sort of broadly right now, federal, but I'd love to know from your perspective and from AMP's perspective, what kind of things are happening at the state level that might be, we could sort of look to as maybe a bellwether for progress?
Yeah, certainly the solid waste is not under the purview of the federal government. Hazardous waste is, but not solid waste. So it's generally managed at a state and local level, and that's where policy, if policy exists, will be. There are some recent federal bills that have some funding for solid waste management infrastructure growth. The Save Our Seas Act that was passed under the Trump administration has about $250 million for recycling infrastructure upgrades, along with the infrastructure bill prior to the IRA has some carve out there as well. But otherwise, it's at the state level or the municipal level, and there's some interesting trends that are starting to happen. And those two trends are the introduction of who is actually going to pay for recycling if you want recycling to improve. And the other trend is consumer packaged goods who have made commitments, or may be forced through policy in the near future, have made commitments to have a certain amount of recycled content in their packaging. So these two forces, these two trends are actually moving together in some ways now. And recycling at a state level generally has been void of public policy in the United States. It really has been a free market for quite some time, with a few exceptions in California and some other places. Europe, on the other hand, recycling is highly regulated. Landfills are banned in most of Western European countries, so you have much different incentives there than you do here, where you have really cheap landfills in some places. So the interesting thing here is that it intersects Colorado. So on the who's going to pay for it side, Colorado is now a leader in this space, recently just passed legislation this year called Extended Producer Responsibility. So this is now a privatization of the recycling infrastructure of the state of Colorado, and it will be occurring over the next 3 to 5 years. And we see this in Canada as well as in Europe, but the examples we would look to are in Canada because they're more hybridized. And what that means is whoever produced this piece of paper is now responsible for how it's going to be collected, sorted, and distributed to a market that will disseminate that for use. So it's transitioning that burden from the municipalities and the taxpayers to the producers of the packaging type. And you can imagine how extensive packaging is, right? This isn't just your Pepsi bottle, your soda bottle. It's going to be all kinds of packaging, both industrial as well as consumer-based. So that is actually a very Colorado-esque solution, right? Because we're a Tabor state. We have a hard time passing taxes here at a state level. So we come up with innovative solutions, like an Australian company owning Highway 36, and we have tolls on that, right? So we look for these types of solutions. So it is in some ways very Colorado-esque, but originating through Canada and Europe. But we do see it with other materials like paint, as commonly in the United States, and some batteries. So that's something that's really interesting to watch, because it goes back to the point I made earlier about where's the local market? Are there entrepreneurial efforts around creating local markets? I think the best place to look at as an example of how this pans out is British Columbia in Canada. So there's similar population to Colorado, similar geographic challenges, mountains and such, but they've had 100% producer-funded and operated EPR for about a decade, and they have about 85% recycling rates there. So I think Colorado's average is 18% now, so that's the growth potential in terms of how to get it, how to sort it, and how to get it to markets. On that consumer packaged goods side, the really interesting thing about these commitments that these consumer packaged goods, household goods, and others that have made to recycle content, is that they are actually the ones who are backing these EPR bills now. For some time, they actually fought them. They're backing them because they got to figure out, where am I going to get enough plastic to put in 15% of my soda bottle is recycled plastic. It is a supply-constrained environment. Despite the fact that we're drowning in plastic everywhere, it's actually really hard to get it out of the garbage or some collection mechanism and turn it into something. So they've actually merged into this trend of EPR and are supporting it as a way to actually ensure that they can get supply by helping to actually fund the recycling system to hit their goals as well. And that actually ties a bit into the ESG goals, because it's again, how do you want to define ESG? We could tuck this one under there too, with the large corporations that are in consumer packaged goods as well.
I want to leave a little bit of time for questions at the end, but before we wrap up, I'd love to give everyone a chance to maybe put a final parting thought in the minds of any entrepreneurs or sustainability curious folks out there. Just some of your years of expertise or advice that you can share with anyone.
I got a number for you: 275 trillion today to 2050. That's all you need to know if you're an entrepreneur. There's going to be more capital going into this marketplace than any other industry, hands down. So, and it is a gigantic number, and it's front-loaded. So we have a carbon problem now. We have it over this time period, but it's got to start happening now. And I think that's, from an entrepreneur's perspective, that's great. Figure where you add unique value and go for it.
I would add that we need every lever we can collectively pull to combat the climate crisis. And so it is, again, right, it's not binary. We need everything. So look at this capital, learn the types of it, stay with it. I know it's hard to be in climate sometimes. There's days where I'm like, not only are you in a growth stage company, but the news headlines make you cry. It's a lot, but we can all stick together. So stick with it, don't give up. We need all of these ideas, and Colorado is a beautiful place for them to stem from.
She stole my answer.
Oh.
If you are at all concerned about climate change, just what the planet's going to look like in 2050, we need technology, we need innovation, we need disruption to the current system that has got us to where we are right now. That is the biggest thing. There is so much opportunity in different little niches, like we didn't even talk about carbon capture or anything like that. There's so much out there, but we have to have it. We need startups. We need disruption to the current state.
Yeah, we all stand on the shoulders of those who come before us, right? And I think one thing that's really cool about Colorado, and clean tech, climate tech, sustainability, circular economy, tech, whatever you want to call a lot of these things, is that this isn't the first time through this. When I first started working in the clean tech industry at NREL in 2008, we were producing reports of, what would solar energy be in 2020? Here's what we need to hit. Oh, we're past 2020 now. I'd like to get a copy of those reports again and see what we said. But what's great about Colorado and the clean tech industry as a whole is there is a lot of effort, particularly on hardware and advanced materials since that time. So there was a significant investment in these long-term, long commercialization cycle technologies. And people have been successful doing that, and they've been successful doing it here. Some examples where companies have come from our universities and gone public are Lightning Hybrids up in Loveland. Solid Power in Louisville, a CSU spin-out, respectively. They've come from the lab, and they've gone all the way to being public companies. And there's other examples in between. So we have a talent base now here that have gone through these full cycles. And then to Mike's point, as well as these hardware solutions and material science and advanced materials deploy, there are these knowledge, data, and analytic gaps in between, which are really exciting. A lot of these industries still need to be more data-driven. And so that really plays into Colorado's skill sets around software, telecom, and others. So we have been here. We're going through another cycle of innovation in Colorado, so it's really exciting. There's a lot of things we can do here, and that we've proven what we can do here in this state.
Thank you. I want to have a few minutes for questions here if anyone, yeah, sure, right here.
before the recording. A couple of you mentioned it, but what business concept or startup idea do you wish existed right now that could help your businesses or complement it? Or is there something that in 10 years you have thought like, damn, this is going to be cool when this startup, when the system can support a startup like this? Can you guys give an idea, or if you have any, on like, what's a new startup idea or concept that you wish existed now or you think could exist in 10 years?
So I'll speak quickly on behalf of the recycling industry. So trying to figure out what to recycle is maybe more complex than doing your taxes sometimes. So where we need a lot of innovation is upstream at the consumer behavior level. And that's one of the most difficult places to go, is into the mind of a human being. But how do we get them to recycle? How do we get them to separate correctly? Because as soon as you put all this stuff together and there's contamination, if you look at an industry like ours that has 20% to 30% garbage coming in as input, it's hard to do business. It's hard to hit those recycling rates. So for us, innovations around the collection and human behavior and recycling are going to be really interesting probably over the next 5 years.
Quick one for us, I already mentioned asset management. There are large companies that do this. They're not great solutions, and they don't really integrate well with large commercial industrial real estate investors.
Carbon capture. Yep.
This one's, it's on the fringe already, but integrated neighborhoods that all have storage that trade power via blockchain between homes at times of demand. No, because that's not my realm of expertise. But
No, Jeff Donaldson.
So the
That
concept
session's
is,
right after this one. You can just stay.
the concept is essentially planned unit development. So take Stapleton, 500 homes, all have solar on the roofs, all have, say, 25 to 50 kilowatt hours of storage sitting in the garage. They operate as an autonomous neighborhood and trade power. When one home turns on the dryer and their battery is depleted, it basically is connected and sends power to them. And the utility can draw off of the collective storage in times of demand to a certain amount. So it creates, a two-way street, but it creates almost microgrids of interactive communities that trade energy and have smart meters and are more efficient and can reach like a net zero footprint without any challenges.
It's funny how your question and your answer, Rob, connects to my curiosity. Well, I come from Brazil and I lived in Germany before coming here. And the level of consumption I see in the US is nothing I have seen anywhere else, even in Germany. So by level of consumption of Americans, what I see is there's no responsibility to the level of consumption that you have. You go to Starbucks, you don't feel that by taking your own cup or having a new cup makes any difference. It's all cost related. So my question is, and connecting this session to the previous session where we had two people from education, my question is, how can we make sure that goes back to education and how it matters reducing the level of consumption first place to then solve the questions of the amount of energy consumption we have is then a second thing. Let's solve how much we need. But first place, do I need this? If each of us were offered a new phone, would we go for it because it costs half the cost of what it would cost in Brazil, for example? How can we make that? Is there an opportunity there to make that education, bring that into the education? I have a 5-year-old. How can I make him consume less and think he needs less to be happy? I'd like to hear your response, Rob, first place. But of course, all the other ones.
So waste is certainly cultural, and how we interact with it is quite cultural. So like in Germany, you have very high recycling rates. But we're not going to recycle our way out of our challenges. It's one of a toolkit of solutions around solid waste. Reduce, right? Consider it if you even need it in the first place. Refill models, reuse models are really exciting innovations around kind of sustainable packaging today. And if you talk to some of the old timers in recycling and then around packaging, they say they've never seen this much innovation coming out. That's what's coming out now. It's been quite stifled for some time. And a lot of that has to do with costs of packaging and then consumer behavior. And we are Americans, right? You know, Winston Churchill said, you can count on the Americans to do the right thing after they've exhausted all other options, right? So that's how we behave here. But there's some really exciting models that are coming out. Seventh Generation's a really good example. They are starting to send their cleaning products, for example, in a steel can as a powder for you to add water to create the product. And then you have a reusable steel can at the end, or it's highly recyclable in a recycling system. So there's really some interesting models. On the education side, particularly around recycling, what we've seen in these extended producer responsibility schemes, like what will be deployed in Colorado, is significant investment in education. So first step is get a curbside cart to every residence. Recycling access doesn't count when your county has a drop-off place in rural Colorado, but they count that today, but it doesn't really count. So then once we've seen in these programs, when they start educating consistently with funding around education, the material stream cleans up quite a bit, and the recycling rates go up. Still doesn't fully answer your question about behavior and such. It's a bit cultural in its essence, how we all consume and how we interact with waste. But there's a lot of innovation going around with the assumption that Americans can kind of continue to be slobs as well.
I would encourage everyone here, when the problem is that big, as you've suggested and you are very correct, is to use the power of your own privilege and what's within reach. When people say like, oh, anti-oil and gas or something, and you say, well, is there any stretch in your clothes? Did you buy them new? Do you shop at H&M, or you have things that are disposable? What's your food waste look like? Are you composting? There are so many things we can do as individuals to lead by example, teach our kids. I have 17-year-olds. I'm working on it. But like I taught them how to shop on eBay. Like there are small things we can do, and then there are big things we can do when we join forces.
Thank you. I think we're about out of time here. I'm not sure if they'll be available after for questions, but maybe. But I just want to say a huge thank you to Rob, Mike, Rachel, and Garrett here for a great panel. Thanks to all of you, and thanks to Denver Startup Week as well.